About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of at this moment, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: our normal awareness, the conscious mind, what keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which is the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness, so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network or structure of neurons in the brain. This means we perceive, we see, hear, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, even before we're aware of it. And some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. And we learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. Based on all of this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity in the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our head. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and brain. The brain, therefore, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them into the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibrations that's different from other fields and may vibrate along similar patterns with those other fields resonating with each other. And we've learned that this field of mind can affect both energy and matter in a variety of ways. For example, experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or as matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. As people's bodies and pets that have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even when they can't be seen or felt. Individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts. And the collective human mind changes the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers that's run by the Global Consciousness Project. As a result of all these, we've heard from a growing number of scientists who are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field. They're equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field, out of which all matter and energy arise. And some researchers are using the equations of quantum mechanics, as well as relativity and computer learning algorithms, to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. These understandings help us understand things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we can access information in the quantum or akashic field through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and our consciousness, how music affects the brain and the body and our connections with other fields of mind, the role of our state of consciousness in the healing process, how the belief in a treatment helps a patient experience healing, how remote viewing and telekinesis must be happening, how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync and maximize our effectiveness, and how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information received from the world and from our mind. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find links to the clips and books and authors that I mention with each show. Today, I thought we'd take this idea of mind as field a little further and try to understand the frequencies involved. We've talked about the vibration patterns of music and their effects on mental activity, and some of that was simply the harmonious balance and the rhythm in the music. But some of that has to do with the specific tones involved. Here's a YouTube clip that explores those tones and their effects.
396 hertz. The first is thought to help liberate us from guilt and fear, which is arguably one of the biggest obstacles we face. 417 hertz. The second helps with the undoing of situations and facilitating change in our lives. It's said to alleviate the conscious and subconscious mind from past traumatic experiences. 528 hertz. The third is perhaps the most famous of the frequencies because of its reputation for creating profound transformations and miracles. It's even been linked to the repair of human DNA, the most basic building blocks of our bodies and minds. 639 hertz. The fourth is said to improve our connection and relationships with the people around us. This includes healing strained relationships and creating new ones. 741 hertz. The fifth is connected to expression and solutions, helping us open up and share our gifts with the world more fully. 852 hertz. The sixth and final of the original notes returns us to the spiritual order, improving our access to the spiritual or sublime. Mother Earth's natural heartbeat rhythm is the frequency of 7.83 hertz, also known as the Schumann resonance. A 7.83 hertz frequency is an alpha-theta brainwave frequency in the human brain. Alpha-theta brainwave frequency is a relaxed, dreamy, sleepy state. That's also when cell regeneration and healing happen.
Those were the 6 notes on what is called the solfeggio scale, which is what the Benedictine monks used to chant the Gregorian chants in, as figured out by folks in later centuries. We don't know for sure, but that's what appears to be the case based on the kinds of instruments that were available and the mathematical relationships involved. The last one, the 7.84, is actually stated much more specifically, too many significant figures, because the Schumann resonances range from about 6 to about 13 in any given time. But if you look at the 8 cycles per second, which is what hertz means, you will find that the brain that is functioning at that level is much more likely to be in sync with the field of mind and less likely to be caught up in the default structure. Now, all of those numbers are fascinating, but they mean nothing to the ear, right? So let me give you some examples of each of those tones here in the next clip. We'll start with the 174 hertz and move up. So after 174 was 285, and now we'll listen to 396, the reduction of guilt and fear. Which leads us to the next one on the solfeggio scale, which is 417, which has to do with facilitating change and undoing situations. So notice there wasn't a whole lot of difference between those two, but you could feel the difference, I'm sure. As we move from 417, we're getting into relieving pain and stress, which is related to reducing cortisol and oxytocin increase and all those good things. What's called 528. And moving up the scale to connecting and relationships, 639. Which brings us to the higher notes in the solfeggio scale, 852, which is about expanding awareness. Some people call that opening to spirituality. And then the highest note in the solfeggio scale is 963. 963 hertz, spiritual awakening and oneness of the universe, opening to our higher levels of intuition. This would be where the default network is shut down, and the only thing you're experiencing is the mind that is one with and part of the quantum field, the universal mind. And there you have it, the essential tones of the original solfeggio scale, which was 6 of them, 396, 417, 528, 639, and 741 and 852. That starts with reducing guilt and fear and moves into expanding awareness as the body is reconnecting with itself and the relationships with others and with the world around us are harmonized. We open our awareness. The other ones, the first two, are 174 and 285. They're associated with just that fundamental getting the body restored to a fundamental working level. And the last one, 963, is that high-level intuition where the brain is pretty much shut down and all that's happening is that spiritual awakening. Now, some of you may recognize some of those tones as what is called by doctors tinnitus, vibrations that you hear in your own head, in your own ears, at various times in your ongoing life. And Actually, that's not too surprising because you're listening to Noetic Moments, which means you're interested in consciousness, which means you've already begun to awaken. And so your ears are beginning to tune themselves to these specific frequencies. Now, just as a reminder, hertz, each of these numbers is referring to the numbers of cycles per second. That is, if you strike a tuning fork, it's vibrating 174 times for every second, or up to 852 times per second to get you these tones. So that's quite a bit of vibration. Woodwind instruments, flutes and piccolos especially, are designed to allow our breath to move through the tube at those levels. And you may recall that most of the birds you know are at these higher frequency sounds. All of them are harmonious with our bodies and with our minds, and all of them tend to reduce the impact of the default brain structure on the way the body is functioning and on our relationship with the mind overall. If you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. And I'm Ruth Miller. That sound, the harmonious sounds of the happy drum, tell me that we need to look at a book and or what's going on in the world today, or what you, the listeners, have been asking me about. So the book I'm going to look at today is actually fairly new. It came out last fall, September of 2022. It's called Of Sound Mind, How Our Brain Constructs a Meaningful Sonic World. It's by a woman named Nina Kraus, Kraus. And another subtitle is How Sound Leaves a Fundamental Imprint on Who We Are. Now, this book is looking at it from multiple perspectives. It says Nina Kraus examines the partnership of sound and brain, showing for the first time that the processing of sound drives many of the brain's core functions. Our hearing is always on. We can't close our ears the way we close our eyes, and yet we can ignore sounds that are unimportant. So it goes on, our hearing brain is vast. It interacts with what we know, with our emotions, with how we think, with our movements, and with our other senses. Auditory neurons make calculations at 1,000th of a second, and we were just seeing that with those tones. She says, hearing is the speediest of our senses. Sound plays an unrecognized role in both healthy and hurting brains. So she looks at what happens in the brain when we speak another language, have a language disorder, experience rhythm, listen to birdsong, or suffer a concussion. So what Nina Kraus is doing with this book is providing the usual scientific perspective with a little bit more than we can otherwise find. So you can get that in all the usual places. The publisher is MIT Press, last fall, September 2022. It's a long book. It's over 300 pages, kind of academic. She's a neuroscientist, after all. She is the Hughes Knowles Professor of Neurobiology at Northwestern University, and MIT printed this for her. The Wall Street Journal review is kind of cool. It says, "A sound mind offers a deeply scientific, yet often poetic, look at the hearing brain and provides an in-depth narrative about why such explorations are important." And there are some wonderful illustrations in this book that make it possible for people to grasp some of the more complex ideas. So there you have it, a book that will help you understand the relationship of these tones with what's going on in the brain. This is in addition to the ones we looked at earlier that are about the brain and music being more than just the individual tones. And she does address music as a part of what is going on, but she's also looking at sound in general. The link for it will be on our website, noeticmoments.org. Let's take some time now and talk about what's going on in the news as it relates to our consciousness. And one of the things that's going on in the news today is something that has to do with earthquakes. There have been so many really disastrous earthquakes in third world or developing nations over the last year or two that people are really getting concerned. Is there any way that we could possibly predict an earthquake happening? And the scientists are saying no. There are no models that we can use. We can say that there is particular stress on a particular fault, and sometime in the next few decades, that stress is going to give way. And that's about as much as they're willing to say. Their mathematical models, even using the artificial intelligence programs they're using to track the faults, is not yet giving them a way to predict in any reasonable fashion what is going to happen around earthquakes. I think that's very interesting because anybody who has paid attention to how people feel around and immediately prior to earthquakes is aware that human beings often know when an earthquake is coming. They just don't always know why they're feeling what they're feeling because, well, we don't train ourselves in the full use of our consciousness. Because our consciousness, our body and mind as a system is perfectly capable of knowing when the low-level tremors are occurring that are the precursors to earthquakes. One of my favorite illustrations of that is in the movie Phenomenon, where John Travolta is playing a man who is damaged his brain and suddenly is wakened up all these other faculties that we have pretended don't exist. But there are many, many people over the decades who said, yep, I could tell there was an earthquake coming. I had that headache. Or I could feel it in my body, or I could feel it in my bones, or I could see that the birds and the animals were whatever. We can know what is going on in the world around us, even when we don't have scientific instruments and models to tell us. We just have to learn how to pay attention to what's really going on in our bodies and in our minds, not in the default brain structure, which is going to say, oh, no, ignore that. That's irrelevant. That's not, clear and measurable and physical and material. No, but our minds and the part of our minds that are functioning and keeping our body functioning, the part of our mind that is keeping our body functioning is very much aware of everything that is going on around us, that is emerging in the natural world around us, and is about to affect us. Some of us are beginning to learn how to pay attention to it. And that's part of the goal for this show. It's part of why I put in all the hours I put in. It's about 3 hours per show, for what it's worth, so that you, the listener, can begin to realize who and what you really are and what you can be and do in a world that you've been trained to think that you're just a number, you're just a consumer, you're just, if you're lucky, a voting citizen in a democratic republic. You're so much more, so very much more. We all are. All beingness. Our mind is part of an infinite mind that is aware of everything going on everywhere throughout all that is, and especially aware of anything that might affect us. I'm reminded of a class I was asked to do way back in the 90s when there was a lot of concern about something called earth changes. And there were maps going around, and the maps showed North America without a California, North America covered in water through the middle of the country, all kinds of things like that. And people were becoming quite afraid. So they asked me to teach them a class. And because I've done quite a bit of work with paleoanthropology and with ecology, as well as with consciousness, I was able to show them the ways and means and likelihood of some of those illustrations. But as I was teaching this class, I became aware of something very important, I think. And that is that when people receive what they call prophecies, what they're receiving has to be in the form of images. Prophetic wisdom is not verbal because languages are unique to cultures and situations, whereas prophecy applies across cultures and specific situations. So prophecy is always in images. And images can stand for something. They are not necessarily literal. So these maps that were being drawn were very interesting. The one that had much of California falling off in the ocean, that break occurred along the San Andreas Fault. Now, I've spent most of my adult life living on or near the San Andreas Fault. At that point I had the better part of 20 years, actually. And I realized that along that San Andreas Fault, two very earth-shaking events had happened, and they had transformed and differentiated different parts of California. Those earth-shaking events came down to one thing: the invention of the personal computer, which led to the smartphone and all the technology that our worldwide culture is totally dependent on today and couldn't exist without. Now that's an earth-shaking event, isn't it? We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there is a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with the archived past shows, and where you can always send me comments and questions, and I will do my best to get those answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks again for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon. Have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.